We're sort of an intermediary between the client, the architect, the developer, and council, and sort of, negotiating an outcome between the two of them. At the end of the day, you sort of work your way through the DA process if you need to lodge a DA, and you sort of normally get to the end of that process, and there'll be 1 or 2 points, which are the critical points. That's when that negotiation becomes critical.
Well, we're back here again at Quincy's, episode 4 of our Basically Speaking vodcast series. Before I introduce our guest, today in episode 4, we're going to be discussing the following on stage from sketch design, which was the last one, very riveting, being design development and furthermore development application. We'll explain what this is because it does get a little bit confusing, or DA. That pretty much applies to about 95% of our projects. So Al's going to say a little bit about himself in a second, but we're going to get him to open this podcast up now. And we're going to get Laura to come in and put some drops in this glass over here for us.
We have a 2023 Grenache, and it is from Barossa Valley. So hopefully you enjoy that. Red wine in the middle of the day. Like that.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. We'll have a bit of a sip of this in a minute. Pretty lucky to have Al, I think, on board today. I find this topic, we have a lot of really cool discussions just generally, but sometimes we've got to really bear down and knuckle into some of these details, right? And we'll get to there in a second, but again, special guest, Al Irvine from PPA Town Planners. Today, I think we might see a little bit of a different side from Al, which I think will be kind of cool. He'll loosen up a little bit.
Maybe a more subdued side.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's it. I'm going to say 7 to 8 years, I reckon I've known you. Maybe a little bit more. Maybe it was in and around the establishment of Quincy's, or maybe a little bit before.
It might have been a bit before that. I had a look earlier today. Our first project together was 2015.
Yeah, okay.
Allen Street in Hamilton. Might ring a bell.
Does. Yeah. So you can often be found because you're a local. I'm not going to exactly say where you live, but you can often be found. I'll bump into you down here. We have a coffee in the morning or a beer in the afternoon. But I think sometimes those little chats are really good because it is informal and we can talk a bit candidly about a few things. And then, you might come up and have an official meeting. And then lo and behold, you end up finding yourself talking to 8 of the other staff about different projects, which is kind of cool. And I think that is what, from my perspective, I like in all of the work we do is that, yes, you can have structured meetings with consultants and clients and so on, but I think sometimes we get the bones out of chats over coffee about, especially this sort of topic, because we've got to, I'm going to say, navigate our way through some pretty rough waters sometimes when there's it's probably part of the project where lots of things are involved, right? We start with sketch design and it's very much ourselves and the client, and often we touch base with you if something's a little bit tricky. Like I know a bit about town planning, but it's really nice if I can just pick up the phone and go, hey, I'm thinking this, and you'll either shut it straight away or go, yep, I can have a quick look. So I think that helps that process, but it just gets a bit thicker from this point in time, I reckon, as in the nitty gritty and the kind of nuts and bolts. And we'll go on about it in a bit, but it does inevitably involve a lot of people, hey?
And like you said, I feel like architects know enough about town planning and sort of know the basics, but it's sort of when it gets a little bit more complicated that we normally get involved.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there are some, not so much cut and dry projects where you're 95% there, but every now and then you'll get the really tricky ones. So, as I said, known you for that period of time, which has been great. I think the way you resonate with Base and our projects and our clients feels like, and I always want this, then we want to do this with clients, make them feel at home, kind of, you can waltz into our office and, it's really easy communications, which I think sets up the parameters, especially when we get to talk to the client and we're all in the same room, right? And we'll get to the clients in a minute because I think there's some real different shifts on what comes first, the chicken or the egg and the horse and the cart. And I'll explain that in a little bit more. So, but what I'll get you to do is just, that's me about you. I want you to just maybe tell our viewers who you are, where you work and what your ethos is about things. And then we'll get into a bit more granular stuff. Yeah. Before you do you want to have a sip? I think it'd be nice. Yeah, cheers. Just like this morning. Oh, I mean, not really.
So, well, firstly, thanks for having us on. Like you said, Alan Irvine from Property Projects Australia. We're town planners and development advisors. We've worked with Base since 2015. I don't live too far from the office. I traverse the street in front of Quincy's here every day. I pride myself on, I'm pretty sure I was the first coffee that was sold at Quincy's. Yeah. And a lot of the first beers, I think, when the bar opened as well. So, we've worked together for a long period of time. We've worked on a range of projects, predominantly resi-based, renovations, new builds, multi-res, over the course of that time. We've had some challenging projects with you as well.
Good challenges though, I reckon.
We've had a few dates in the court. We've had a few incidences like that. So that's been good. So Property Projects Australia, we're a town planning firm of about 12 people at the moment, sort of vary between 10 and sort of 15 at different times. We have an office in Brisbane and an office in Toowoomba. We're also in the process of opening an office in Melbourne at the moment. So that'll be a new thing for next year. So we've had a guy down there for 12 months now. We'll have another guy down there next year. So that'll be exciting. And then, so that's pretty much who we are.
Yeah, look, I think, from yours and Sam's perspective as well, I think we've worked on a range of projects. And look, there's staff come and go, as that's just business. But, it's really, I think it's important and really nice that, like I said to you, that, you can come into our office and pretty much walk around and talk to a myriad of the staff about particular projects and just keep changing the hat as you go. And I think when you guys get staff in as well, we'll get introduced via email or however, I think it's really nice that I don't just need to speak to you. You got to get to learn different people's skills and sometimes the projects get reasonably complicated where I do need a little bit more our advice, but it's really nice when you can, I guess, your thought processes and ethos and training can kind of filter down, I think, which is important.
And that's the whole approach that we want to take. We want to have, the other people in our office, the younger people in our office doing the legwork and also working with the younger people in your office because they're the leaders of the future. They're the people who'll be running the business in 5-10 years time. So and running these projects. So that's the intention behind that. And like you said, it's good to, the informal engagement as well. You come into the office, you'll come to meet on something for half an hour, and then spend the next hour talking about new projects. And I think that's where we've actually sort of succeeded in winning a lot of projects as well because we've had that initial engagement.
Well, it's the early advice, right?
Yeah. And walking past and having a coffee in the morning and seeing your staff out there or your team out there and having a quick chat to them about a project or a potential project as well. So
it's a weird thing in our game, right? And we'll get to talk about other specific consultants we need for development applications and the like, but I do find, and I mean the way I work is, I won't go so far as to say free advice, but it's early advice. We often will find ourselves, I would rather give a lot of time at the start, and not all projects will come off. You know that, and I know that, and to be honest, if they all came off, you probably couldn't manage them. But I think that's really, it's rapport, it's relationship building, and I'll know that if I send you an email saying, hey, look, I've had a new inquiry or a repeat or whatever, that within 24 hours, 48 hours, you've got something back, and what that does is it looks really good and feels really good for the person who's actually asked me about it first, and I've said something like, look, here's my initial thoughts on it, but I'm just going to, give me 24 hours, I'm going to try and extract a bit of information. First, they're like, oh, well, how much is that going to cost? I was like, no, look, this is about building those core components to be a potential future project, right? Which might happen in a week, might happen in 6 months. We've been speaking to, I won't mention names, but we've been speaking to that person over the last 6 months. Awesome. And they've looked at about, maybe 7 projects?
Yep.
But you and I both know that they're going to find something.
Something will happen at some point.
Something will happen, and
Yep.
we're giving the good advice, because if we see that a particular project or site has some pretty hard constraints, being that we've known the brief, we'd be silly to just try and grab that job.
Yeah.
We're better off going, hey, let's hold out. Because that builds confidence in that client as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really critical critical thing, which helps us. Now, the other thing I will say, and this is the first one of where we've got consultant in per se, right? Because we deal with a lot of other town planners.
Yep.
And you deal with a lot of other architects. And that's really important for viewers out there and our colleagues, competitors and that this is...
You're not wedded to...
We aren't wedded to anyone, and you're not wedded to anyone. It's about best result, best fit. And we can't have every town planner sitting in here.
Yep.
So...
I need the best.
So I feel very special. But I think that is important to say, because that notion of collusion and all those sort of things is not kind of what we're about.
Yep.
This is about getting information to disseminate to our clients, friends, colleagues, community.
And from our perspective as well, if we are the town planner who have given you that initial advice, or given the client the initial advice, whether they go with you or someone else ultimately, we've got a foot in the door, and we've given them the town planning information they need. So we're big fans of the early engagement as well. If we can get engagement with the architect and sort of inform the direction of the project early on in the piece, it makes everyone's life so much easier down the track. If you're, take Brisbane for example, if you're dealing with the traditional building character overlay and you've just come in and you're going to blank slate, new build, and not realising there's a pre-46 building that needs to be dealt with or whatever, the whole project can take a completely different direction. Even to the point where we're trying to pre-purchase advice and due diligence advice, even before the architect's involved, if we can give the client that upfront advice and give them an indication on what the challenges might be, whether it's building age, whether it's heritage, traditional building character, vegetation, flooding, something like that, it makes the purchase decision a lot easier as well.
I think so. And just what you said then, all of those things, we'll try and explain a bit.
Yep.
Because there's misconceptions, there's probably a little bit more misunderstanding.
Yep.
And I get it, because I've got to try to always put myself in the shoes of the mums and dads, or the new developers, or the seasoned developers, because the tone, the language, and the narrative can either be very intimidating, especially to our mums and dads. I often put myself in their shoes and think, oh man, there's a lot here. We do it day in and day out, right?
But naturally, people don't want their dream or their design dictated by someone else. This town planner who's come in and told me I need to do this, and this to get this over the line. And that's, once again, I think the earlier the engagement, the easier that is, because we can sort of navigate that path with them at that point and go, well, here's the requirements you need to deal with. And I think a lot of time clients are scared of development applications and town planning and development approvals because for that reason, you're sending something to council. Someone's going to critique this. They're going to have a say on what I want to do. So,
And look, we'll get to councils in a minute. That was the intro.
Okay.
All right. But we've touched on some things. So I said we've done sketch design, which is, you're starting with potentially a little bit of advice, and then it's all, we do some 3Ds and planning, and then we start to go, well, I've grouped design development and development application in this discussion, because I think often a question gets asked, what's the difference between sketch design and design development? The easiest way is saying, look, it's just the progression of, you might start with a fat pen on the back of a beer coaster, and then it starts to turn into CAD drawings and the like. But come with that is a whole lot of other information, which we can mainly deal with. And we've got to be careful we don't share everything with the client, not from the fact we're hiding it, but I don't want them to feel intimidated. I don't want them to feel overwhelmed. The whole idea of us and that team is we take all of that angst and digging and research out of their court so they can enjoy the process. But we still got to inform on what we're doing. Otherwise, it's you don't want them thinking, what are they doing? What am I paying for? And so on. So as part of, yes, the design can develop, as it suggests, design development, inevitably we are leading to a development application which goes to the higher end, being whatever council in any body, whether it's BCC or Sunny Coast or the likes, right? And they all pretty much, run to the same tune, really. So, but it gets pretty deep. Certain sites have what I describe, and correct me if I'm wrong anytime, but triggers, whether it's triggering or not. But triggers, I think even over the last 15 years, I'm going to say, I think I said here, like 95% of the projects requires the input from a town planner.
Yep.
Now, as architects, we can try and masquerade and do our own town planning. I think 20 years ago, it was probably done a little bit like that.
The town planning framework has changed dramatically in that period of time. We've gone from planning schemes that were that thick to, I think the Brisbane City Plan's 650 odd pages now. So, you really need to be an expert in that area to be able to deal with that, and also understand sort of the process and those little pitfalls, I guess, as well. And each council does have their own unique things as well. So you talk about Brisbane, and Brisbane's got traditional building character and protection of pre-46 buildings. You get to the more regional councils, and there's agricultural land requirements, those sorts of things.
All sorts
the
of things.
The coastal area, everything. Every council has a different.
But it's the same concept, right?
Yep.
And it's the concept, I think, because there's a lot of things we uncover collectively of a site that you don't need to share every little bit of sand with the client, mainly from a protection perspective, right? But for us, we've got to dig deep and kind of work out, well, who do we need on board here? Because then we've got to deliver back to the client why we need to spend $2,000 on a fire report and, acoustic reports and an arborist and so on, right? So, a client will come and say what their budget is, and they're like, oh, I'm going to get this house. And all of a sudden, there's all these other costs. And we want to minimise that. And when I say that as well, there are projects where I say to you, look, it's on the edge in the sense that if we did this or did that, we could not need a DA. It's a little bit of a funny one because
that's where we think
planner, right?
we're a town planner. We make money out of lodging DAs. But at the end of the day, if you can avoid lodging a DA, me personally, if I could avoid lodging a DA for a project that I was doing, I'd follow that. And I think that's where we like to give you guys the advice, as in, here's where you are at the moment. Yes, you trigger a DA for these reasons, but if you go and do this, this, and this, you may be able to avoid the DA.
But that's where it sort of, putting friendships and things aside, I think there's quite a few projects where we say, okay, well, we still need you to do something. So I say to the client, look, we've still got to spend a couple of bucks to get the advice that can go on to, and I'll just touch on it now, the building certified.
And that's what I was going to say, is because the planning framework is so complicated now, or getting so much more complicated, certifiers, architects, related professionals used to be able to interpret the planning scheme relatively easily. Now, given changes to insurances and structures and all these sorts of things, we're finding more and more that certifiers and clients are wanting something from a town planner, even if it's a letter to say you don't need a DA, because that gives them the comfort that they're protected. If council come and knock at the door at some point, they know they're protected. The certifier can put that on his file for his insurances and everything. It's all
I think though, as well as, and we are in this litigious society, right? And planning schemes get thicker and they're plugging holes, and I get all of that. And they're there for a reason. We do have some argy-bargy with some decisions that do come from council, but I get why, right? I get there's a framework, I get there's acceptable solutions, and I get if we didn't have that, it'd be a little rogue, right? So we need it, but it doesn't mean you can't. If you do the design right and you get the framework of everything right, it doesn't mean you can't negotiate, you can't talk to council. There's avenues to do so, and I think, 20 years ago, you go in all a little bit brash and go, no way, you stamp your feet, it gets you nowhere. I think by packaging everything up in a way that we can deliver it to them and go, look guys, I know it says this height or this direction here, but we're going to do this on the design merit based on this. We believe it's a good outcome and it's responsive to, protecting spaces. So
that's where we see our role. We're sort of an intermediary between the client, the architect, the developer, and council, and sort of, negotiate an outcome between the two of them. At the end of the day, you sort of work your way through the DA process if you need to lodge a DA. and you sort of normally get to the end of that process, and there'll be 1 or 2 points which are the critical points. That's when that negotiation becomes critical.
But I reckon with all of that, with all of the additional people required, my gut at the moment says that as a collective, we're operating better and delivering better applications, and it's gone away from town planner does that, architect does that, and the certifier will deal with that later.
Yeah.
And I was guilty of that years ago because that's just seemed to be how it used to run. But now, and again, we're not wedded to a certifier, but there's certain certifiers that I can say to you, hey, we're going to look at using such and such. Let's have a bit of an intermediate conversation. So all of a sudden, I keep using the word team. That starts to manifest itself so that, a little bit of work back there is going to make the work up here so much better.
There's undoubtedly crossover between the certifier and the town planner, and making sure we're all on the same page early on in the piece. Who's doing what? You know, the certifier is happy with QDC requirements, siting variation requirements. Who's managing that? All of those sorts of things as well.
And I think each, including your firm and what you do and the particular certifiers we do use on predominantly a lot of our jobs, is that time that they are wanting and prepared to do early, they actually see the value in it too, because it inevitably makes their job easier at the end, right?
And from our perspective, it minimises the changes down the track. There's nothing worse than the certifier coming back and going, oh, you actually have to reclad this entire wall because it's combustible cladding, or whatever the situation is. If we can deal with that early, before we lodge a DA, before we get too stuck into the town planning requirements, it'll save having to come back and make a change or alter the design down the track as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, there's lots of things about a DA, right? There's the package of information it goes through is quite steadfast, and it's like, right, we're lodging. Soon as something else happens on the way, like say you've lodged and the client goes, oh, I want to put that rooftop terrace on there. You're thinking, okay, how do we navigate that? Do we wait for RFI? Blah, blah, blah. So doing all of that, I'm finding now putting so much more work in, even to the client saying, hey, we've got to make sure this is on budget. And we did some costing stuff in a previous episode. I think it's really important that it's that information that we're constantly giving clients and other consultants so that we're all knowing what's going on. Because as soon as that one goes away, that link in the chain gets broken, and all of a sudden you can lodge a DA, it gets approved, and go, oh, we don't want it. Oh, you're going to do it again. And that's
and we're finding that a lot as well with the cost of construction and material shortages and those sorts of things. Clients, builders, developers are spending a lot more time up front to make sure it stacks up and make sure it's financially viable before lodging the DA. Whereas I guess during the boom during COVID, especially with residential projects, renovations, new builds, it was literally, here's some plans, let's lodge a DA and get it in, and let's just, you know, we'll deal with the consequences down the track. Now we're dealing with the legacy of that and working through and changing a lot of approvals and scaling things back and
the
value managing things.
As well is you need to do extra work and I need to do extra work, and we're probably hands tied to charge further for that because it's not fair. So
it's a difficult discussion to have with someone who's stripping money out of a project to try and make it work and make them, you know, they construct it, and you know, you're saying, well, we need to go through a process and there's a fee for that, and you know, all that sort of thing as well.
Absolutely. So look, that's a bit of a chat. I've got in big yellow here. So we're going to tee off with some bigger, broader questions, right? And we might have touched on a little bit there, but there's a bit of a sequence for some of these things here, right? And the reasons why we do it, okay? So, as I said, I've grouped design development and development approvals together, right, as a topic because they're entwined. But I want to ask you, if we just park the development application side of it to the side, because that's the end game, right? Getting that package together. I've talked to you about what I think design development is. So what does design development mean to you? And I guess, and choose how you want to answer it, but from your perspective, but with an architect, this is a bit of a learning. It's like, what are you expecting more of architects in a design development perspective to make the development application gel better?
I guess from my perspective, if we're dealing with the town planning requirements at design development, the horse is probably bolted to some extent.
Okay.
Like I said, the earlier we can get on board, the earlier we can give you guys the parameters to work with, the easier it makes your job and makes our job. So, you know, our preferred outcome is we're engaged at pre-design, you know, at the time of purchase, and we're giving you those parameters to work through. If we're having to rejig something at design development, your client has obviously hitch their hopes and dreams on a certain layout or certain design, and we're having to sort of negotiate back from them.
And we may have gone with them, right? Yeah. So and depends on the project, right, and the skill set of the architect and the knowledge and so on. But yeah, I find that we've been pushing to be engaging you even early stages of sketch design, right? Okay, that's cool, because I think that's a learn, and I think that's a bit of a changing thing, because...
And even before, like the client that we've been working with for the last 6-7 months on purchasing a property, you know, just working through each of those options time after time to try and find what suits their needs, you know, where they can put their dream home, you know, the overlays, the constraints.
But you found out a lot about him too.
Yeah.
And I think that's really valuable.
Yeah.
And that moment, you know, there's been some frustrations, and I get it, because it feels like every time they bring a project, I'm like, no, it's not good. I think he said to me at one stage, do you not want to do a job for me? I'm like, no, you've got such a really cool and boutique brief that we're trying to actually marry you with the perfect site, right? So I think by the time it happens...
It's a time-consuming process, but it's satisfying when you get there and you see the final result. And from a planning perspective, from an architectural perspective, you've created something beautiful. From a town planning perspective, we can look at that and go, well, you know, we've had something to do with that project. We got that off the ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
That team and ownership I think is really important at the scale of projects we do, and I think it should apply all the way through. But I can only talk about what we do, right? So we often get asked by clients, what's the difference between sketch design, design development? And I get where they're coming from, right? Because it's potentially a bit of a foreign kind of language to it. I know you're pretty interested in sketch design. Now, I say that because it doesn't always happen that way. It's a little bit like, it can be a bit like, get your package and then I'll look at it and make some notes and then we'll put the application. I think those days are gone. I don't actually think it's out there anymore. So I think it's nice that early sort of discussions can happen.
And I think between Base and PPA, we've sort of developed a fairly good process over the period of time. As in, you get a new inquiry and you'll run it past us. We'll give you the parameters to work towards. And that engagement has started very early on in the piece. So by the time you're sending us plans for design development, for lodgement with a DA, they're well progressed at that point in time. And we've got a fair level of confidence on yes or no and where the hurdles might be during the DA process, if we're going to a DA as well. So,
and the other thing I've got written here on this note was, and there is no right or wrong, but I'm finding, and pending the project, and pending also how that project or that client finds out about us or you, it's nearly feels sometimes like it's 50-50 that a client, whether they're a mum and dad or a seasoned developer or a new developer, they could be ringing you first. Now, whether that's an instinct for them or whether they've spoken to their friend and they've said that's what you do, or they ring us first. And I think, as I said, there's no right or wrong, because if you're attuned that way, you can give the right advice that's not going to scare them away from an architect, and vice versa, you know, from a town planner.
I'd say the vast majority of our work still comes through architects and through referrals. But there are, you know, quite a lot of instances where someone comes to us with a site and says, this is what I want to achieve. And then at the same time, we also need to marry up, you know, what are you wanting to achieve on the site as well. So
that's probably developers more so. I think the mums and dads.
Typically, a mum and dad referral is from an architect.
Or
a word of mouth, as in word of mouth is probably some of our best referrals, because they've done a house, someone from down the street or someone from school looks at it and they go, I love that. You know, who did the design, who was the town planner, all of those sorts of things.
Look, it's just becoming more the norm, and the purpose of this is to just have our viewers and audience to understand, right, okay, I understand now that there's another step. But going back to the mums and dads, I keep I think 70% of our work.
I was going to say the majority of work that we've done with Base over time are new builds, house renos, family, mum and dad type things. There's developers in there. We've done some multi-res together, but
so very seldomly they'll ring me and go, hey, I've already spoken to a town planner, but sometimes they're more often to ring and go, hey, I was speaking to a builder. And they've said to come here. So, and that's again, that whole team thing, we do need the build. We'll talk about that in a couple of episodes, but there's no, as I said, there's no right and wrong. And I think yesteryear there probably was. It was like everything starts with the architect. You know, I think think we throw those days out because we need everybody.
Yeah.
You know, you need us, we need you, and the clients need us. Everyone needs everyone. So that team component from the start is really, but it's really daunting because you all of a sudden the mums and dads have got architect fees, an engineer's fee, town planner's fee, you know, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, like, so it is, and we're often asking why they are, what, you know, even say the bushfire, you know, that's a different type of fee if it's a building certification or a DA. So yeah.
And then the implications from that bushfire report as well might be that you need to change the design, you need to change the cladding, openings, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so we've discussed design development, which is about furthering sketch design, adding the next level of detail and start to involve all sorts of people and consultants. I often sort of, especially with, once again, our mums and dads, I'm like, okay, put yourself in their position. And you've got to keep doing that because you get lost in the stuff you do and you start talking to them and they don't understand. You're like, well, of course we need that. So, you know, I find glazed looks on clients' faces when we start talking about acoustics or arborists and the like, right? And you're thinking, why do I need someone to come in and tell me about the tree? Well, the tree's protected because Alan has said that's a very significant tree. So that, once again, that's another trigger. And all of a sudden, when you start to then embrace that notion, that tree, that becomes part of the design. All of a sudden, it's not just about the tree, but the tree is part of the site and it's a perimeter. Like we have a boundary, like we have height restrictions, now we have a tree. And we've got to get someone to tell us the trees, you know, dovetail into your report, right? The tougher sites are the ones, and I'll touch on it. I've got some case studies here, but I'll just need to say the word Pomona to you and we'll talk about what consultants are involved there. So what's the difference between a DA and a BA? We'll go into that later, right? But we touched a bit before about it. So for those listening, DA
is it's a development approval. It is a town planning approval. It deals with, I guess, high levels, you know, new use, building work, the planning scheme requirements. It's a high level approval. It deals with impacts, amenity, all of those sorts of things. So what are the impacts? You know, are we going to have overlooking? Are we going to impact on that tree? The constraints from the site, you know, we're talking bushfire, flooding, all of those sorts of things. Whereas a BA, which is a building approval, deals with the technical aspects of it. It deals with the building regulations, cladding, you know, stair treads, balustrades, all of those sort of more technical aspects of it, where a DA is a high level approval effectively.
And that's pretty much word for word what we can explain to a client, but sometimes they still go, well, hang on. So council says that, but then we've still got to get someone else to do it because the misconception is that you got to go to council to get a building approval, right? Which we don't anymore. You know, that's just as simple as that. They can be bound together, and that's another way to look at it. But I think if you join them in the early stages, it then becomes a little bit of a tick and flick notion because we get to put an application in, it gets assessed, it comes back as approved with conditions. And it's the conditions that then the building approval, like the certifier, has to look at the conditions and go, oh, there's a special condition in there for this project that they need to now adhere to. So, but even just explaining
and
that,
ensuring the two sets of plans marry up as well. The other issue that we find a lot of the time is that the DA plans, and you progress through your design, there's tweaks and changes made to those DA plans as you get through, and then all of a sudden you get to the building certification stage and there's you know, some discrepancies between the two sets.
Well, it used to be
generally in accordance,
right? Which somewhat still holds some level of, you know, and it's interpretive, right?
Generally in accordance is a professional opinion on whether a change is consistent with the approval, and the wording and structure of approvals from council have tightened up over time, which make that process very difficult now. But
I haven't got it here, but it just dawned on me as well. Timing often is a big one as well for anyone doing any project because sometimes there's financial things involved, whether it's from a mum and dad's perspective going, hang on, we're going to sit in DA for 3 months, 4 months, all things being equal. Well, that's slowing things up. Hang on, I'm renting, there's double mortgages. we have to wear those hats. And as I said before, putting yourself in the client's position, not that can speed things up with council. However, again, relationship-wise, when an application goes in, you get notified and I get notified of who the team in, and we'll use Brisbane City Council because just for an argument's sake, they determine who's the lead assessing officer and so forth. And we can look at those names and go, oh, good. Oh, I can just ring that person. So there's still a little bit of a informal connection on that application. And I think that's important because we can know early, even though they've got mandatory dates they need to adhere to. If we can speak to an assessing officer and say, look, it's all looking like they don't use these words, but effectively saying it's all looking pretty good.
Yep.
We've got to go through our checks and balances, which we understand, but we don't see any particular massive red flags. No. We can go back to the client with a level of confidence and go, look, it's feeling really good. Yeah. We can keep progressing so you can actually overlap some things, because the scary thing for people is like, oh, so you lodge it then, we can't do anything for 4 months.
Yep.
I would hate that, because you'd be there going, well, hang on, surely we can start to continue to jump a few steps knowing that we've got to come back. And
well, and the ideal process is you lodge a DA, but when you lodge that DA, you have a fair understanding of what the key issues are going to be. The further you work through the DA process, from lodgement to information request to an information request response, the more comfort and confidence you will have. So that gives you the ability to progress with detailed design at that point in time. You know, once we've fundamentally got the tick of approval from verbally from council to say this is going to get over the line. We might have to wait another 2 weeks for that approval to physically come out. But you know, you've got the level of confidence you need to be able to push on with the next steps of it as well. And I think the other thing is, you know, typically a code accessible DA in Brisbane City Council, we talk sort of somewhere between 2 and 4 months. Every council has a sort of a fast tracked assessment process that you can go through if you want. The other thing we keep sort of brushing over as well is not all projects need a DA as well. You know, there are requirements under the planning scheme where you can avoid a DA. So if someone is keen to get on site sooner rather than later, or they've got a builder locked in, if there's tweaks they can make to that design to satisfy those requirements, you can potentially bypass the DA process and go straight to a BA.
And I think that's the stuff that you want to hear straight up, rightly or wrongly. Because there are other projects where, a hand on your heart, you're going, look, we're going to lodge this. I feel there's going to be some pushback on some things. I think we can argue them or discuss them, but don't get your hopes up, because the worst thing you can say, and I did it, you know, years ago, you go, oh, it's going in, it should be 2 months. All of a sudden, 6 months later, you're still having this battle. So once again, that information, because that can help a family either establish where they're going to live and how long they're going to rent for, or what they do, because there's money involved. There's time, there's stress, there's schooling, and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, we're architects and town planners. We're also parents, and you're kind of understanding of how everything works.
Sometimes you also get surprised by outcomes as well.
Oh, true.
As in, sometimes you'll lodge a DA and think you'll have all of these issues, and then it rolls out 2 weeks later, and, you know, having done this for 15 years, you stand back and go, I don't know how that happened.
We never asked them, though, do we?
No. So we had one with you guys a couple of weeks ago.
I know.
That just rolled out of council.
But we even do that. We talk about our resource and we go, right, well, that one's probably going to be there. Maybe don't need everyone on that. All of a sudden it comes on and the client goes, oh, wow, let's go. And you're like, so they're good and bad problems. But and it's just planning, right?
And also touching on that, the negotiation with council throughout the process as well. As in, typically when you lodge a DA, we'll get in touch with the assessment manager as soon as possible afterwards, start to sound them out on what their thoughts are, what the specialists, so internally at most councils, the town planners will farm it out to the ecologist, the architect and all the bushfire consultant, seeing what feedback's come back from those specialists and starting to weigh that up and give some thought to what might be in an information request or what council might be asking for down the track.
You know, we have these other conversations about decisions that council may or may not make, or some requests for information. But at the end of the day, we need them. And they've not just got a job to do, but like really broadly speaking, somewhat protecting, and there's some guidelines for the fabric of the city, right? Like really that's out there. But then you drill it down into the neighbourhoods and you can kind of understand it. And we don't want to lose our heritage, and we don't want to, but we'll still challenge it on design basis, because all councils in their marketing and I guess their development of things, they produce some really good outcomes with respect to subtropical design and designing for a livable city and buildings that breathe and sustainability. They're all awesome. Yeah. I still find some of their guidelines and codes kind of don't talk to those. Yeah. I feel, and I think we should feel, that we're obliged to challenge them on that, to go, hang on, there's a really great document, Buildings That Breathe. Yep. Yet you want to limit the windows we can put on here that allows that to be, and that's okay. We don't do it to be dogmatic or pig-headed about it. We want to get the best design outcome, and I think that's really important. And more often than not, councils, if you paint the picture properly and talk to them, whether it's at mediation or a request for information stage, I think it doesn't often fall on deaf ears, but I think they can learn stuff out of it as well.
I think what you need to realise as well is the town planners working at council are town planners, they're people. Yep. They don't have a grudge against you. No. They don't have a grudge against that town planner.
Sometimes
they're looking. Oh yeah, I completely understand that. But they're looking to deliver a result just as we are. Yep. And they're working
with their benchmarks.
And we're all working from the same benchmarks. We're all working from the same planning scheme. Yep. We're all looking at the same requirements. It's just that negotiation. And like I said before, it's that last couple of little points on any DA where you might have a bit of a Barney with council, but you've resolved 95% of it. That's just those. That's the negotiation.
It's always the little ones at the end that I think make the projects. Yeah. And for us, it's real easy to just go, oh yeah, okay, accept it. And you tell the client, oh, you can't have that. Yeah. Or you can challenge it a little bit and go, I really think this has got some merit.
Yeah. And that's why there's obviously the DA process with council. Yeah. If a resolution can't be reached during that process, there's obviously the Planning and Environment Court. There's steps you can take in the event that the conditions on a development approval are unreasonable, or there's a refusal issued by council. It's not our preferred solution. I think you're in the same boat.
Absolutely.
Priority is always to get the quickest DA approved from the council with the least changes possible.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I've got a couple of dot points here. We've probably answered. How long will the DA approval take to approve? I know that's...
How long's a piece of string, Sean?
A little bit, I know. But we can ask ourselves that question on the merit of the project. We deliver that news to the client.
And from experience, you start to understand, 2 to 3 months for a code accessible house DA in Brisbane is a reasonable time frame. Like I said, every council has a fast-tracked process as well. The more complicated the project, the more issues there are, the longer that time frame is going to take. If you trigger impact, public notification, you then start to get into this you've got submissions, you've got notification, you've got time frames, you've got the risk of an appeal, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, and look, sometimes you don't have a choice, whether it's a change of use or that's pushing it into impact. And it's pretty easy to understand impact. It's like, okay, there's an impact on the code, so how do we,
And there's clearly an inconsistency with the planning scheme, which is the trigger for that.
Yes, and that can just be the case, unfortunately. So we'll skip over that one because there's no real answer. What if it doesn't get approved? And when we say that, it's like you've lodged the application, there's some RFIs, request for information. We may have left something out. We need to get another specialist, so you feed that back in. If at the end of the day they go, look guys, we can see where you're going, but we're going to say no. There can be a myriad of reasons.
Yeah, right? I was going to say that may not be a non-compliance with the planning scheme.
Yes.
There may be public backlash. There may be external influences at play.
Political. There's all sorts of things, right? So we do need to be aware of that as well. This is more about going, well, there are next steps. The more we go, the more money it costs because we're going to need solicitors and barristers and there's mediation. And as the word says, it's not as daunting. Yes, it happens in the court. Yep. But you're basically there's a mediator trying to, around a table, get somewhere. Yep. And that in the ones we've done, when I say we've gotten the result, it's not about us winning, sort of is, but
we've gotten the outcome.
We've got the outcome. We've just had to jump through a few more hoops. And it is a little bit disappointing, especially with our mums and dads, where they've had to potentially fork out 20 grand to get something which arguably or not, we should have.
I don't think it's something that people should be, like I said, we try and avoid it in all cases.
Absolutely.
If it's unavoidable, I don't think it's something that people should be scared of.
No, true.
The Planning and Environment Court, it's a court of experts. So there's town planning experts, there's visual amenity experts, there's ecology, architectural, all of those sorts of things. It's a hearing anew, so you're starting with a fresh assessment. So you're going into that mediation with a new team. There's lawyers and solicitors there who are looking at it with different eyes, which is also a great outcome sometimes, because you've been dealing with this person or these people in the DA process for 6 months, and they may have become fixated on something. You also, and I also, might have become fixated on something and not budge, but you get that fresh set of eyes and that new idea that comes in, and that sort of unlocks the whole puzzle as well.
The biggest problem I find with it is if it drags out too long, and we're doing it for all the better reasons, you don't want the project and the clients to start to feel like, do we really want to do this?
And I think the majority, the Planning and Environment Court process, you can withdraw or cease that approval at any point. Or if you went to a mediation and you realise that the amendments that are being sought, you can't incorporate or whatever, you can scale it back and sort of get the approval out that way.
It's a bit of a last resort.
And I think given the scale of the projects that we work on, like if we're talking about a house reno, a resi project, the finances probably aren't in it that you would take something all the way to hearing. So
that's right.
you can sort of go through a couple of those early phases. If there's no real green shoots at that point in time, you can obviously go back and scale.
True.
Scale it back, so.
And that's often that happens. I mean, we do maybe 2 a year, I think, in the whole scheme of things. But I do still find it crazy, that because the common thing clients say to us, mums and dads, but we bought that land, it's our land, we just want to put our house on it. I get all of that. So there is still a very much a educational side of things that I think is really important. And more people that understand about this, the whole idea is it sets some expectations, and it's like, okay, let's just roll through these.
I think the mums and dads in particular, the developers are probably
a bit more
understanding of it. There's a process. There's so many occasions where a mum and dad will come and say, we've got an information request, they hate our design, they want us to change it, and I was like, just cool your jets a little bit. It's part of the process. We need to make some tweaks. There's a negotiation to go on here. Are they going to approve your house? Yes.
Yeah.
We might have to change the pitch on the roof or put some eaves on it or something like that.
But that's where the emotions get. And again, I get that. So we want to always...
And going back again, to the early stage of it, the earlier we can get on board, or a town planner can get on board the project, the earlier you can start to inform those decisions as well. So it's not a shock when the information request comes
100%.
through.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so all of that more, factual parts are great. I was just thinking about talking about a couple of real situations, and we're not going to give out
name names,
but it's probably more, and this is probably where the ears might prick up with listeners and mums and dads, because I've got sort of renovations, new house build, and subdivisions, right? There's probably 3 reasonably common requests, right? And maybe there's some definitely commonalities with new house and renovations, right? Again, 50-50, probably ring you first or me first, right? But inevitably we arrive at the same time where you and I need to talk together and go, hang on, we've got a house over there, we've got a parcel of land that may or may not have a house on it, and that house may or may not have certain triggers attached to it, which can either determine whether it can be kept, whether it be knocked down, can it be moved, can it be raised, can it be painted, can it, they're pretty common. And I'd say 90% of our discussions are in and around that. I should also say all this stuff's not, it's not just in our brains. Anyone can find this stuff. If you,
Development
Eye.
Every local government has some form of interactive mapping and some form of interactive DA tracking.
And it's actually pretty, as trained in what we do, we can know where to click the buttons and whatever. But if you spend enough time on it, you can type your own address in. It'll bring up a whole heap of fields and overlays, and it might be daunting, but they might learn a bit about their site either before they've bought it or not. The worst case is someone's bought it, potentially an agent, or there's some words that says, yes, you can knock it down, and then they go home, they buy the house unconditionally, then they go, oh, we've got this, we're going to knock it down, and then we find out it's an 1890s workers' cottage irrespective of termites and damage and whatever, you got to keep
gotta
it.
keep it.
So early advice again, my advice out there to people, if you're going to try and buy something, seek a chat with us first. Don't trust what you read.
Yep.
Because I think it's really quite dangerous. But look, in renovations or new houses, it's like, where's it located? So we can, if someone rings me on the phone, I can just jump on like you can, and you can go click, click, click. Okay, I've got a real synopsis on what you're going to be able to do here without getting too deep into it, right?
Yep.
And that may also be outside of town planning stuff, talking about cost and so on, is right. Can it be knocked down? What if it has termites? I say that because years and years ago, you used to be able to argue something could be knocked down if it was unsafe or structurally
unsound.
Yeah. Now, it seems to be that, no, we want to protect that.
Yep.
If you've got to spend 500 grand on just making it sound, so be it.
The test on that has changed over time, and there used to be a measurable dollar value that you could attribute to it, a portion of the valuation of the land or something along those lines. But
it's better the devil you know, I think, in some situations. So, but that doesn't mean it's a dead duck as well.
Yeah.
Like sometimes, for my sake, it's like people say, "Oh, don't you just prefer if you can knock something over and start again?" And I'm thinking, if the bones of something is there and it has this nostalgia about it and it can talk to the new component, that's okay.
There's something satisfying about reusing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So what can trigger a DA? As I said, over the phone, we can go, well, it's got landslide, it's got this, it's got that.
Yep.
Sometimes, very rare, you can go, actually, it's clean.
But even if it is clean, there still will be other triggers.
Yeah.
Non-compliances with building height, setbacks, all of those sorts of things.
And again, and we'll talk probably more so in building approval stuff, but that, even the height, I still have people like, oh, you can build to 9.5 over the whole site. And I'm like, if it's angled like this, just copy that up and everything's got to be in it. Yeah. Not, 9.5 meters there and real techie stuff, but I think...
I was going to say, don't get started about the definitions of building height, stories and basements. It'll go on for days.
It does. Can I move it? Can I split the block? We'll talk about that in subdivisions.
Yep.
Can I build to a boundary? What height can I go? Who do I need to be involved? And that last one's really critical because that's where you can start to go, oh, there is that tree, there is that sewer line, there is that. We have to start building enough information. That one we've got over at Indooroopilly at the moment, heavily forested. Biodiversity, there's waterways, there's koalas, there's flooding, there's everything. I look at all that and go, okay, cool. You just got to tick through them, get the relevant reports, and then you can do that. And
figure out where you want to put the building or where the client wants to put the building to.
Yep.
You may be able to avoid some of those triggers just by locating outside the overlays.
So there's a fair bit in it, right? But we don't want to say that to be super daunting to a prospective client. It's about just trust us, come along for that ride, and we'll explain it to you. But that's a mindset thing as well, I think. The one I just said before, can I split the block? That's a classic, I've got a block splitter, or, there's lots of rules in and around that. But probably just leads to the subdivision. Well, it's technically potentially a subdivision if it's one lot. What are the parameters about subdividing? Why do you want to subdivide? Is it in an area that can substantiate that? That opens up a whole nother realm of cool things, because there can be some really great advantages, and I use the word sustainable. I see a block this big, right, and go, okay, you got one little house on there. It doesn't feel like it's a great utilisation of the land in a particular area, right? So is there guys to split it? If so, what are the minimum sizes? It's a really nice discussion. That one we did in Ashgrove, I think it was a cracking use of land, whereby the existing house, there was land at the back, beautiful trees, a creek, there was an existing pool, and we fashioned a home around it. That was a really good exercise. It was tough because you then enter into services and NBN and all sorts of things.
Stormwater discharge,
And I think if the attitude of the person buying that block of land with the vision that we can facilitate is one of the biggest parts of it. It's never as easy as just drawing a line across there. But I find it fun going, well, I reckon it's a great opportunity, and I think it's worth going down that path. But obviously not everyone.
Oh, and the value add, putting aside a subdivision as well, you might look at a site like this and go, there's potential there for a couple of townhouses or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
Is that something you want to look at? Is that something you want to pursue as well? So
it's those discussions, I reckon, and I use the word opportunities a fair bit, because I would engage with a phone call from someone saying, "Oh, look, I've potentially got this site, or I have this site," and you can look at it and go, "Wow, you could do a myriad of things here. Let's come in. We might end up having a meeting so we can all talk around the table." And I think that's a really good thing for people to know that they can do. And it's not necessarily going to cost you $10,000 to do, because we want to make this into a really kind of cool use of a parcel of land that's maybe underutilized.
Yep.
You can get the flip side, of course, where someone comes and says, "I want to put 20 townhouses on a site," and you look at it and go, "Okay, it's zoned for it, but you really can only get 10.
Yep.
And that's when feasibilities and all sorts of things may or may not stack up. And that was one of our previous episodes about finance, and that hopefully all these are starting to gel together. But that was an interesting one, to the point where we've done them, right?
Yep.
We know the parameters, and we get it. They're a long, lengthy thing. But I've mentioned before that word Pomona. And we did this, right? So it was 10 acres.
Yep.
Oh, great. It's zoned to do this. I think over all of my years of talking with different consultants, this one was like, you're getting tested.
Waterways, access,
Yep.
fire egress. What else do we have? Fencing and critters.
Yep, fauna, flora, the whole, it was fun. I can say that now, but it was quite, I'm not going to say traumatizing, but I think I was getting tested on that one. I think we all did. It was in an area which was a little bit of a tough council as well.
Yep.
Not to mention tunnel boring under dams to bring services in and the like. But that stuff you still learn from, though, right? And I learned so much about that, which we can all then hopefully, you can impart that again on future projects.
Yep. And you'll find that each council has their trigger points and things that the coastal councils, Sunshine Coast, Noosa, it's all about that coastal feel and that coastal vibe. Whereas Brisbane City Council very much in a resi space about the protection of traditional building character and the protection of pre-46 and pre-1911 buildings. Every council has its own, like I said earlier, every council has its own little sort of trigger point, or the things that they're passionate about and passionate about retaining as well.
But I think whatever project, whatever client, whatever jurisdiction, whatever, I was going to say country, but whatever state we're in, the concept's the same.
Yes.
And it's about the client, it's about information, it's about a bit of education, it's about communicating and trying to package what's involved, because there was a lot in that.
Yeah.
Like there is, and you could keep going, but I think the purpose of why I thought this episode would be good is there's a lot to take on there. There's a lot of questions. There's maybe some little answers that people could get out of that, but I think the concept is talk to us about it before setting your heart and soul onto something. It might still be fine.
Yeah, we often have the inquiries come through of someone bought a site. It's in inner city Brisbane. It's covered by the traditional building character overlay. It's in the character zone.
Yep.
And here's what I want to build, and it's a modern, it's a modern house that you might see on a canal on the Gold Coast or something like that. And then you've got to sort of immediately you're starting to sort of pare back the expectations right from where you go. And that's why, like I said earlier, the earlier the engagement, if it's at purchase, pre-purchase, whenever it is, the better.
But that's the perfect thing. Design's design, and if someone wants to have a ultra modern home, floating concrete floors and glass,
you can design that.
That's great. Yeah. Potentially don't go and look for a site in Spring Hill or Paddington or, just all I'm saying is if that's your vision and it's okay to have that, we need to find the properties that suit that the best.
Yeah.
It's really tough when you get the reverse side of it where, hey, I've got this block and you go, okay, it's got all these things on it. I'm not going to say you can't do that, but you're probably going to need to somehow leapfrog straight to court to try to argue this one. And I don't know if that's potentially where you want to start the project.
And I think you need to realise the court are working from the same planning scheme that the council are as well. So, just by saying we'll go to court doesn't necessarily mean it's a done deal. It's a shoe-in sort of thing.
It's about horses for courses, right? And I think our job is to help and inform people if the horse hasn't bolted, so to speak, to guide them into what could be the best situation for them in so far as a site or a concept or what to look at. They're the best inquiries. Hey, I've got this vision. I was thinking about doing this. It's like, cool. Yeah. Where are you thinking? Oh, over there. Oh, okay, maybe we need to. So you then start to be, you're not out there looking on realestate.com for them, but you've started like that person we're dealing with now. I reckon that what they're doing is awesome. Like they're fishing in the right pond. They're just trying to find...
And willing to wait.
Willing to wait, yeah. That's exactly right. And I think that not everyone can do that because emotions get involved. You can accidentally buy things at auctions. But getting all the ducks in a row is really critical from that. Knowing if it's got real super constraints on it. So I reckon we can conclude. There's a fair bit in that, hey, like...
I'm glad you didn't let me go off on a tangent because I feel like I could have really got into some detail in there at some point.
We probably both have a little bit, but what this one is more mainly aimed at is formulating questions. Because if you don't have questions out of hearing all that, you probably haven't listened to the deep parts of it.
Again, early engagement. Don't be intimidated by the process. Is what I'd say. It is a process. Not everyone's out to sort of kill your design or sort of, people want to work with you, council included. And there's ways to work through these solutions. And there's multiple avenues to get to the same pathway. Yes, you might need a DA. No, you might need a DA. You might be able to design to avoid a DA, or you might need to go through the courts. You might end up in that position, but it's not the end of the world.
And you can also, before touching that pen on design, you can actually, it's okay to start with a bit of an Excel spreadsheet of some potential costs and time that are associated, because that may or may not
inform the decision
to buy or not to buy, or what I'm up for, because that could be really devastating. Is embarking on something and then go, I didn't factor any of that in, I didn't know that, right? And then mums and dads and anyone is not meant to know that. Ask the questions. Do a bit of research as well. Like it's actually all there. This isn't our own little oracle and Bible. Like Development Eye, Brisbane City.
I only thought it was sad town planners like myself who trawled Development Eye and whatever, but there are other people out there as well. So.
I think it's really important, and it's where you start. Every inquiry has an address. Punch the address in and see what it kind of can develop. And I think this process, like last one we talked about sketch design, can be a bit, ethereal and whatever, and you've got to jump into these things and you jump out of it and you come back in, and that's quite an iterative process and a long process. And the whole aim of these podcasts is to say, not to be daunting, but just say there is steps to follow, and we can all be here to kind of guide that as well. So thanks for tuning in, and thanks Al for coming along for, I'll say, a candid chat. We got a bit granular, but that was okay. But I'd probably say like we're reasonably passionate about design, building, construction, town planning, all of that. And I think that's what inevitably can make pretty successful projects if everyone's informed, right? So I'm asking everyone at the end of each one about our next one. So next episode, we're continuing this journey, and we're going to start going a bit. We touched on building approvals, right? So we've got the DA, then we've got this framework. Now we've got to get a certifier. I haven't fully mapped out the episode, but I'm thinking probably get a bit of advice from you. Like we could talk a lot about building approvals, but I think maybe grouping, like I grouped this one, if we grouped building approvals with construction, because they do talk to each other in one, and I'm thinking maybe of getting either a project manager or a builder in. It's a tough one because, again, like I said to you, we work with a myriad of builders, and I don't want to favour one. So you need to make a decision, so it's not my decision. No, you don't. But you know a lot of our builders as well, and we've got to look at who could sit here and really for it to be quite informative as well. So look, got a little bit of time for it, but what do you think do you reckon putting building approval and construction together as one would be? It runs the risk of being even more lengthy, but
it would be a long episode. But I think the two do have to work hand in hand, effectively. And I think even to some extent, like we said earlier, tackling the DA process or the town planning onto the start of that building approval process as well. So
yeah. Okay. Look, food for thought. We might have another chat about it anyway. But hey, thanks for coming along. I know it's a bit of time, but I think it's informative. These are, not aimed at necessarily generating business. It's about generating discussion.
Yep.
And I hope that we've done that. There'll be lots of questions. So if anyone's out there wants to talk about any of their projects, they can clearly talk to me.
Or me.
Or you. PPA.
And I think it's about informing people as well about the options and it's not something to be scared by or intimidated by, and give everyone some resources to work with and be slightly informed to be able to have discussion as well.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll get you to shut the session up. And while you're doing that, to the viewers out there, if you've been following the last few, YouTube, Spotify, all the other podcast languages out there, I keep forgetting them all, but thanks, Al, for coming along.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
And we'll see everybody in the next episode.